Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, it is the Labour Party's first budget in 14 years. The plan is ultimately aimed at making Britain the fastest-growing economy in the group of 7 nations. But will the tax and spending measures work? Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump are running neck and neck. Billionaires have funded their presidential campaigns to the tune of millions of dollars. So could the tycoons help to swing the result? And Russia's military spending is fueling inflation. Everyday items are becoming more and more expensive for many Russians. The central bank has raised interest rates to a record high to help ease prices. It is a big budget and a big political moment for the UK's governing Labour Party. The British Finance Minister has announced eye-watering tax hikes, with businesses and the wealthy bearing the brunt. Rachel Reeves has also gone big on borrowing and spending. Reeves says the measures are aimed at improving public sectors, boosting investment and laying the foundations for higher growth in the longer term. However, her imminent target is plugging a hole of almost $28 billion in public finances, which her party blames on overspending by previous Conservative governments. Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the plan will be painful now in order to deliver better days in the future. As Jonah Hull reports from London.
A budget for the ages, or so Keir Starmer's Labour government hopes, delivering first stability and then growth to Britain's economy after 14 years, it says, of Conservative neglect.
On July the 4th, the country voted for change. Yeah. This government was given a mandate to restore stability to our economy and to begin a decade of national renewal.
Yeah. There were tax rises, an enormous $50 billion worth, calibrated to hit employers and the well-off rather than workers' pay. And there was the promise of more borrowing to generate growth.
And the only way to drive economic growth is to invest, invest, invest.
Yeah. The opposition's rebuttal was fierce.
They don't like it, but this is the truth. They have fiddled the figures. They have raised tax to record levels. They have broken their promises, and it is the working people of this country that are going to pay the price.
Voters who gave Labour a landslide victory in the summer will want to know one thing: will it work?
I think this budget is enough to stop things getting substantially worse. I'm not sure it's enough to really fix our broken public services and ensure that people have a decent standard of living. The real test will come at the next general election, when voters will be asking themselves, do I feel better off than I was 5 years ago?
It's a so-called tax and spend budget. Billions raised from taxation for public services, billions more raised from new borrowing for other investments. It should be a recipe for growth. And for Rachel Reeves, Britain's first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer, a career-defining moment outlining the blueprint for change that Labour promised. Jonah Hull for Counting the Cost, London.
Well, let's hear how some Brits feel about the nation's economic situation.
The state of the economy? Oh, well, it's been running down for years. I've worked in local government and London government for years, and, you know, how local authorities are managing, I don't know, because there's no money at all. It would be a good idea if we just got the rich to pay.
I think that it's in a pretty dire state. The public sector is having difficulties. I don't think it's correct that West Streeting is saying that the NHS is broken, because a lot of very good people are working there and doing their very best. But there is poor management in certain areas.
We are in a very difficult position anyway. We need to spend money on the economy. So whoever is in power has got to make some commitments, particularly to the public sector, to get the economy going again. So it's going to be difficult for any party that is in power.
Joining us now from London is Jonathan Portes, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College London. Jonathan, good to have you with us. Again, it was, according to all the pundits, a classic Labour tax and spend budget. What did you make of it? And is it going to be enough to get the UK's economy roaring again?
Well, there are two aspects to it, really. In the short term, taxes have gone up to increase spending on public services, especially the National Health Service. And I would say that's something that governments of both parties have done quite a bit over the last 40 years, not just Labour. In the medium to longer term, the government is going to borrow quite a lot more to invest with the hope of restarting growth over the medium to long term. And that, unfortunately, is something that governments of neither party have really done over the last 40 years. So that's a big shift. Will it work? Well, in the short term, there will be some more money for public services. The question is, will it be enough? And perhaps more importantly, will it be well spent? Will the government actually be able to deliver the improvements in the National Health Service and other public services that really the British people really want to see? And in the short term, that's by far the most important thing, I think, for how this is received. In the longer term, the important thing is, will this extra investment actually deliver higher growth? Will more investment in transport infrastructure, rebuilding schools, and a whole host of other things, green energy and so on, will that get Britain back to something like the levels of growth we had before the last 15 years, which have been pretty miserable? And again, that will depend on how efficiently and effectively that money is spent, but it'll take quite a long time to come through.
I want to come back to the point you made about government borrowing in just a few moments. But first, let's talk about the tax burden. The fact that the government is placing the tax burden now more on employers and the well-off. How will that help growth when you hear of some employers now saying that, well, they can't afford to invest or to take on more people because their tax burden has gone up?
Well, nobody likes paying more taxes, of course, but this is, and this will have some negative impact on some employers. But it's not that big a deal, quite frankly. It moves us slightly closer to more European levels of taxation, although we still tax jobs rather less than most comparable European countries. The Office of Budget Responsibility estimates that it will reduce employment on net by 0.1 to 0.2%. Of course, that's not a good thing, but it's really not a huge deal in the great scheme of things. So I think we should take some of this with a pinch of salt, quite frankly. The
now opposition Conservative leader, as we saw in Parliament, accused the new Labour government of fudging the figures, talking about government borrowing, as you were. They've shifted the goalposts, haven't they? They've changed the rules on government borrowing. Is that not fudging the figures?
They have changed the rules, and pretty much every economist, I think, that has talked about this issue has said they are absolutely right to do so. The previous rules made little or no sense and would have, under the previous government's plans, resulted in substantial, very large cuts to public investment over the next few years. That would have, frankly, have been absolutely crazy, given what we all agree is the UK's considerable accumulated deficit in public investment. So yes, they have changed the rules. You can call it fudging if you like, and they were absolutely right to do so. The previous government had left them with something which, had it actually been implemented, would have been, frankly, an absurd way to try and grow the UK economy.
Labour had to get the pain out of the way early in their 5-year term. Will British voters feel any better off by the time of the next election? And will Labour have to issue another painful budget somewhere down the line?
I think on the first, the key thing here is delivery on public services. That is what will make people feel better off. Will I pay somewhat more tax as a result of this? Yes. Will I think it's worth it if unlike what happened to me a few weeks ago, I don't have to wait for 8 or 10 hours in the accident and emergency room with my mother with a fractured hip? Yes, it will be worth it. And most Brits will feel the same, quite frankly. But the key is actually making sure that extra money for public services does deliver improved health services and other services. That's what will really matter to perception of whether this is a success in the short to medium term.
Okay.
Will they need another budget? I think that depends on a lot of things, many of them out of their control. The impact, what would a Trump election do to the global and hence the UK economy? We don't know, but it could be significantly more impactful than this budget, to be absolutely honest. So we don't know what will happen in the next few years and what they'll need to do. But I think this is they are making a gamble here. The gamble is that they can spend this money effectively on public services in the short term and on investment in the medium to long term. I think given the state of the British economy, given the mediocre performance of the last 10, 15 years, that is the right strategy. It's the right thing to do, but they really have to deliver, and that was not going to be easy.
Professor, it's always good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Jonathan, many thanks indeed for being with us again.
Thank you.
Now, winning the job of US president requires deep pockets. This year's race to win the hearts and minds of American voters was expected to be the nation's most expensive in history. The Democrat and Republican campaigns and their allied groups have spent almost $16 billion over the course of this election cycle. That's according to Open Secrets, a non-partisan group that tracks money in politics. Billionaires from Silicon Valley to Wall Street have donated millions of dollars to help their preferred candidate win, raising concerns over whether they're trying to gain future political influence. The campaign by Democrat Kamala Harris held a fundraising lead over Republican Donald Trump last month. But how much of that money came from the super rich? Victoria Gatenby looks now into how some of the tycoons have approached this election.
The United States is home to around 800 billionaires, some are using their vast wealth to try to influence the outcome of the presidential election. Billionaires donated around 18% of the $3.8 billion raised in total so far by the Republican and Democratic campaigns. 82 billionaires are supporting Kamala Harris, 52 are backing Donald Trump. Donations by billionaires account for 6% of Harris's total campaign fund and a third of Trump's, the majority of his money coming from 4 donors.
I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark, gothic MAGA.
They include tech billionaire Elon Musk, who's given $75 million to Trump's campaign, and Miriam Adelson, who's inherited a gambling casino empire from her late husband. So far, she's given Trump $100 million.
Those donors, millionaires, billionaires, are really supporting super PACs, which are stepping in to kind of fill the fundraising gap that Republicans are facing due to their poor fundraising from small donors and sort of people, regular people.
Media reports suggest Harris's billionaire donors include Bill Gates, who's said to have given $50 million to a political action committee aligned with Harris, and billionaire and former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. When billionaires donate money to presidential campaigns, the question, what's in it for them, is inevitably raised.
And we're going to bring Elon in.
Musk's support may lead to a cabinet role in a Republican administration if Trump wins the presidency.
Take over, Elon, yes, take over.
Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Joining us from Massachusetts is Raymond Laraja, who's Professor of Political Science and co-director of UMass Amherst Poll at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Good to have you with us, Ray. Like many countries in the world, the US has campaign spending limits on each candidate. How are the ultra-rich able to throw so much money at this election? Are the rules being bent?
That's a great question. And yes, the rules are being bent. The reason is they can give tons of money without limit to these groups that are called independent. And these groups then spend the money to support their favorite candidates. It's really a way to get around these limits, and many of the richest people in America do this.
All right, so if the rules are being bent, does that mean the election could be being bought? What does this tell us about the state of US democracy? Will this money in any way sway the election?
Well, a presidential election, they put on a lot of ads in a few key states because we have this electoral college system. And they could make a difference when the election is so close. At the same time, people watch the candidates on news all the time, and so that helps as well. The best way that money is spent is to help people get to the polls in the United States. But most of that money is going into TV ads in places like Pennsylvania. I think people there see a political ad every 10 minutes. I'm sure it's driving them crazy.
What motivates the ultra-rich to donate such huge sums of money here? Is it through genuinely held political beliefs, or to sound a cynical note, is it because they expect to be able to exert some sort of political influence in the future?
Well, it's certainly an ideological component. A lot of the wealthy have more conservative views on the economy, and so that's part of it. I think the rich are split between Harris and Trump, and they have different reasons for supporting them. I think a lot of the rich have very close relationships with Trump because of he's a billionaire himself, and so they're supporting him. They have particular interests at stake, given that either of these people getting into office. So I would say it's a bit of both, maybe more on the business interest side.
Do they get tax breaks on the money that they donate?
No tax breaks on that. No, they don't.
Okay.
That doesn't help them.
All right. So what does Elon Musk in particular get out of backing the Trump campaign?
Well, Elon Musk is a very unusual billionaire. He likes to be very much in the limelight, just like Trump, and he has these. He's involved in a cultural war against the liberals. He's very much against some of their more progressive positions. Now, of course, Elon Musk has a lot at stake as well. He has many businesses that are tied to even U.S. national security interests, such as his firm Starlink. So, it does create the impression that he is getting a benefit from supporting Trump so much. At the same time, he's turning off a lot of consumers who might be buying his cars. Many people do not like his politics. So this is kind of a risky game for him. He owns Twitter. Many people don't like to use Twitter anymore because of his very strong positions on the conservative side.
And what motivates people who are backing the Democrats?
So the Democrats, a different story. For the Democrats, if they want stability, the rich people think that Harris will be more stable for the country. Trump, they feel, is unpredictable, even if maybe he'll cut their taxes, and they genuinely don't like him. And so for them, and you have to understand that it depends on the industry. Hollywood, of course, is mostly supporting Harris. They always have supported the Democratic candidates. The people in the oil and gas industries and tend to support Republicans, and they're supporting Trump. And the tech industry and the finance industry is largely split. And so, although most of them still support, I have to say that she's getting more billionaire support. I think about 80 billionaires support her and about 50 support him. So there is divisions, and some people are staying away from the whole thing and not endorsing. People like Warren Buffett, the investor, Jeff Bezos, they don't know who's going to win, and they don't want to make anybody angry.
But does the amount of money donated and spent on U.S. presidential election campaigns need to be capped?
In the United States, that would virtually be impossible to cap spending. We have a judicial court, a Supreme Court, who has ruled time and again that the First Amendment, which is about free speech, does not allow restrictions on spending because they view spending, political spending, as a form of free speech. So I don't see that happening anytime, even if people want it. And there's a lot of election lawyers out there anyway who can help people get around such restrictions on caps and spending. So I don't see it happening.
Really good to talk to you, Ray. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
Price rises have cooled in many parts of the world, and central banks have lowered borrowing costs. But in Russia, interest rates have been recently raised to 21%. That's the highest level in more than 2 decades. The move is in a bid to slow down an overheating economy and to rein in soaring inflation. The high cost of living has been blamed in part on record military spending to sustain the war in Ukraine. A shortage of workers as a result of military recruitment is also contributing to inflation. The war has left hundreds of thousands of Russian men dead or seriously injured. Hundreds of thousands more have left Russia to avoid conscription. Companies are competing for workers by offering them higher wages, and that's led to higher consumer spending. Military spending has led to a boom in the Russian economy, but economists warn the supply and demand balance is at breaking point, with potential long-term consequences for Russia's financial stability. Joining us now from London is Tatiana Oliva, who's a lead economist for emerging markets at Oxford Economics. Tatiana, good to have you with us. What do you make of that whopping interest rate rise by the CBR? Is it going to be enough? It must be enough, surely, to cool inflation in Russia. And how long are rates going to have to stay that high?
Hi there. Well, the thing is that there is no guarantee that this is the end of the hiking cycle. There has been no sign yet of inflationary pressures abating, despite that the central bank has hiked its policy rate by 500 basis points since July. It takes a while for the monetary policy transmission mechanism to work, and perhaps in the next few months, there will be evidence that the central bank's tightening is taking effect.
But what impact?
I think there might be another December.
What impact, Tatiana, is a rate that high going to have on both Russian businesses and consumers?
In response to the higher central bank policy rate, local banks will be increasing their mortgage rates and the rates they charge on consumer loans. So after a while, there will be an impact. The consumers will be less willing to take loans at an even higher rates, which, to be honest, are already quite prohibitive. And eventually it will slow down demand via this channel. It has to be mentioned, though, that in Russia there are multiple subsidies, and even though the most popular mortgage subsidy was withdrawn as of the 1st of July, there are still other mortgage subsidies which are supporting demand for mortgages, and the same applies to corporate lending. Russian companies are still benefiting from subsidized loans, where the government basically subsidized banks for a part of the interest on certain loans. Therefore, the dampening effect of these rate hikes is not as high as it would be.
In what state is the Russian economy right now, the country dealing as it is with high rates of military spending and, of course, Western sanctions?
Well, yes, the growth rate is still quite high. We have recently reduced our growth forecast for this year from 3.9 to 3.6% because the economy started slowing already in the second quarter of this year. However, the growth is still above potential. So I would say demand is still overheated. But following this very significant tightening of monetary policy, there will be cooling and the rate of growth will be slowing in the coming months.
Thanks for being with us on Counting the Cost. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Fuel prices have jumped again in Nigeria, piling more pressure on citizens already battling the country's toughest cost of living crisis in a generation. Petrol now tops 70 cents a litre in the capital Abuja, more than 5 times the price when President Bola Tinubu took power in May last year. He's scrapped petrol subsidies as part of a sweeping reform programme, driving up the cost of food and transport, as Al Jazeera's Ahmed Idris reports from Abuja.
Every week, Victory Onyekaba travels 15 kilometers to this rural market to shop for food. Each time she's here, she says, prices keep going up. She got back home at midday to prepare a meal. Not lunch, but dinner. Her family will have to skip lunch in order to afford dinner.
You go to the market today. When you are going tomorrow or next week, you add another money to the previous money. If not, you will not be able to get anything back home.
Nigerians are going through tough economic challenges as the cost of goods and services soars. Although the price of goods has gone up sharply, incomes have plummeted for most Nigerians. Recently, the government more than doubled the minimum wage, but activists say the weakening of the local currency, the naira, has eroded those gains.
Even if you have ₦1 million in your bank account right now, the value of ₦1 million is now about 100,000 naira. And that's why the minimum wage increment does not excite anybody, because the increase, in fact, the 33,000 that we had as minimum wage had more value than the 70,000 minimum wage now, because this 70,000 naira minimum wage is like 7,000 naira in terms of value.
Twice this year, Nigerians took to the streets to protest against the rising cost of living triggered by the high price of petrol. Since the last demonstration in July, prices have risen by 65%.
We've come to one of the petrol stations on the outskirts of the capital, Abuja. The price here is 73 cents a litre. It's higher in other parts of the country. This price determines what happens to nearly all the cost of goods and services in the country, especially foodstuff.
The rising prices have deepened Nigeria's cost of living crisis. When President Bola Ahmed Tinubu took office in May 2023, he announced an end to the country's wasteful fuel subsidy regime as part of a broader economic reform. Officials say the measures are necessary to grow the economy.
It's not sustainable. No economy can take that. And so the president took that very bold and courageous decision to take it away. And the moment it went, we had more revenue going into our economy. The federal government, the subnationals, so their take-home virtually doubling, and in some cases even tripling.
The government says its reforms have started yielding results. Many Nigerians want to see those results in decrease in the cost of petrol, transportation and food. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Abuja, for Counting the Cost.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, I'm at @Finnegan on X. Try to remember to use the hashtag AJCTC. You could also drop us a line. Countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual links and indeed entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.